Hello, I'm Jorge Gestoso. Welcome to a new program. On today's show, the challenges for our migrants. Our guest, Abel Nuñez, Executive Director of CARECEN, the Central American Resource Center. Abel Nuñez, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Abel, in recent days, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, was reporting that the Justice Department admitted in court that they were keeping families separated more than what initially were reported. We're talking about more than 1,500. And among the 1,500, at least 200 were children of 5 years of age or less. And the total of separated families could be at least 5,500. Are these definite numbers, or you're still sort of suspicious that could be something different?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's going to be more. What we have seen with the Trump administration is that he creates chaos. Not just chaos for the immigrant community, but chaos for his own administration and the people that have to implement the policies. And so what we've seen at the border is that when they began separating families, it didn't have an infrastructure to making sure that they could follow the family to the child. And so this is where we see a lot of the separations, and that has continued on. Some other policies still are separating families, and the reality is that after this administration is long gone, there's going to be a lot of cleanup that needs to be done, particularly with immigrants and their violation of rights, of children that have not been reunited with their families, and even parents that will probably lose custody of their children in this process.
At least there are the fear that some of the children will never see their parents again.
Unfortunately, the way it works is when a parent is not found, the child then is sent to the foster care system. And many times, a lot of American families adopt these children. And it takes years before the biological parent finds where the child is. And by that time, in many instances, judges give full custody to the adopted parent. And basically, the biological parent loses all authority and all power.
This policy of family separation is being called by the Republicans, the same political party of the President Trump, as cruel and inhumane. Is that right?
It is correct, and it was intentional as well, because President Trump was clear that what he wanted to do was to punish immigrants for the simple act of trying to really live a better life for themselves and their children. And because they came here unauthorized, without permission, he really wants to make sure that they suffer. But I think bigger than that, he wants to make sure that they tell the people back in their country of origins that the U.S. is no longer a welcoming place, that you will suffer pain, and that it's better for you to stay in the country of origin.
NBC Network was reporting in recent days also that the Trump administration is considering the possibility of naming Chad Wolf, who is considered the architect of that policy of family separation, as the new director of the Homeland Security Department, which supervises, if you want, the immigration service. So we're talking about the cruelty of this policy, and they're thinking to name the architect of this policy. What sort of message is sending?
Well, I think it's clear that people do not last in his administration, particularly in the Department of Homeland Security. We saw Kristen Nielsen didn't last too long, and we said many long-time sort of career people that have worked and left or been fired. And so what Trump is really looking is people that are going to implement his policy or the policy that the people around him are creating. So every time someone gets fired, we're getting worse and worse people appointed to those positions.
Among the measures that are thinking to take is to take the DNA of migrants. What's your reaction?
Well, it's unfortunate. You know, this country does not have or values its privacy more than anything. That's why we don't have a national ID like many other nations have. For us to be able to do that only to immigrants, it's just targeting them, and it's another brick on that virtual wall that says that you're not welcome. Now, if the president wants to take DNA from every American for the purposes of logging it in and making sure that if a crime is committed, it can be traced back to you, and the country agrees, then I think it will be welcome for immigrants. But when you're only targeting immigrants, that some of them are seeking refuge or are petitioning legally to come into this country is unheard of. And again, it's one more policy that is making this country unwelcoming.
We are learning now that in the border with, in southern border with Mexico, now there are more Mexicans that are coming to ask for political asylum than Central Americans that there were the most last year. And in that case, they cannot stop them because they were trying to stop Central Americans saying that they were having to apply for political asylum in the country, in the next country to the one that I left. But now Mexicans are coming and say, I would like to have asylum, and they cannot say no. Things have changed?
Well, no. I mean, I think that President Trump's understanding of asylum is a process that is used by immigrants to just come into the U.S. He doesn't understand that people are asking asylum because they're fleeing danger, oppression. Now, those conditions have not changed in the country of origin. And when we see Mexico, conditions have actually gotten worse. The rate of homicides is at an all-time high. The new administration of AMLO in Mexico has not been able to take a handle on this violence, and people are feeling it. And so their only recourse is to leave their place of birth and seek refuge. And so yes, the U.S. will see an increase of Mexican nationals trying to do it. They won't be able to stop them, but what they will do is reject their claims because it's very difficult to prove that you have a valid asylum case. And so they're only not changing the way in which you can apply, but the metrics by which is measured so that they can limit the amount of people that can actually come in legally into this country.
What is called the Northern Triangle. We're talking in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. They have been new policies regarding immigration. And Mick Mulvaney, which is the chief of staff of President Trump regarding all that scandal around Ukraine, that he has said publicly that in reality it was a quid pro quo between President Trump and the president of Ukraine, which basically is extortion. It was, if you want my military aid, you have to do me a personal political favor for my own political benefit. In that case, finding dirt on the Bidens, on Joe Biden and his son Hunter. And then he said, and so much so that we are been practicing this, that we're doing it all the time. For example, we did it with the aid to the Northern Triangle. So there is a clear sign that Trump was trying to twist the arm of those three presidents for his own benefit?
Oh yeah, that is clearly true. And I would say that the U.S. foreign policy throughout its history has used extortion to force countries to do what it wants. But by and large, though, what the U.S. or the president tends to ask these nations are things that have implications for national security, economic access to their markets, or whatever that is of national interest to the U.S. This time we're seeing a president that is looking for personal favors, right? In Ukraine, as you mentioned, it was specifically to get dirt on an opponent, Biden, as he's facing him in a tough re-election campaign. In the Northern Triangle, he was forcing those governments to accept their nationals so that he can go to his base during the elections and demonstrate that there are less immigrants coming in to the U.S. So those are very personal favors that help him ensure that he can continue or to be a successful candidate for a second term.
And what is happening then with the Central Americans? In reality, the flow has stopped, or this is a time bomb that is going to explode in a different way?
Well, the reality is that the underlying conditions have not changed. There's still a lot of violence in those nations. And so what we're seeing is that people are still coming, but they're using much routes that are much more difficult, that are unseen. A lot of them are staying in Mexico or being stranded in Mexico. And what we'll see is that the flow continues to come out, but the conditions by which immigrants have to traverse the road is much more difficult.
In order to create a new hurdle, they're trying to put, for example, the principle of public charge to or new residents or new citizens. Tell us about what they're facing.
So public charge has been in the immigration code for a very long time. It already has existed. There are mechanisms in place to make sure that if someone comes in, it's not going to be a charge of the government. But what he has done with this public charge or this new policy is to really increase the level of benefits that if they need to have them, they will be excluded from ever getting legal permanent residence. It takes into account their health, their age. So for anyone trying to petition their parents, they might not be able to come because if they can't prove that they're going to be viable and earn money to sustain themselves, they're not going to be able to come in. But again, so a lot of these policies, what we do is he implements it, he announces them, and then we sue him. So most of these policies, whether it's public charge, whether some of the asylum provisions, whether it's TPS or DACA, we always are going to the court, which is the only branch of the government that is still doing its duty. And so we're hoping that we can have some benefit. Now, he still has a Supreme Court, which he has loaded up with people that see sort of his perspective. But at this point, the courts have given many injunctions, including public charge. So public charge the new rules were supposed to be in effect October 15th. That is now on permanent hold until the court makes a final decision on the rule itself.
And what Trump is trying to get, for example, the pure white immigrant?
Well, yeah, enrich. So what he wants is people that have a higher income bracket that can come in and invest in this country, you know, monetarily. But the reality is that the history of this country has been that throughout all its wave has been people that have been fleeing starvation, political oppression, violence, and they have made this country stronger. So it doesn't matter how you come in, what wealth you bring in. The reality is over generations, we built this country. But Trump, you know, really only sees the immediacy, right? He's very transactional in that nature. And unless an immigrant can come with some benefits, he really doesn't see the need for them in this country.
What is called the American Commission for Human Rights have shown extremely concern about what is supposed to say what they identify like violation of human rights from the Trump administration, and they say that basically they're after foreigners, they say, because of their nationality, language, gender, and they say that as a very grave 3 areas, and they say asylum, detentions, and family separations. In terms, let's start by the first. Asylum, what are sort of the violation of human rights that they are concerned about?
Well, one is the reasons why you can apply for asylum. So when Attorney General Sessions was holding that position, he actually changed the law by which people can apply. So family violence doesn't count anymore, nor gang violence doesn't count anymore. And so you're limiting the scope by which people can apply. But two, it's also the process of petitioning for asylum. In the border, they're doing metering, which means only a certain number of people can come in, which forces people to then cross illegally. And now if you cross illegally, ask for asylum in agreement with Mexico, which is called MPP, all of those people caught that ask for asylum, instead of waiting in the U.S. like it's always been done, they get sent back to Mexico to await their case that could take years. Unfortunately, Mexico does not have the ability to maintain these families, provide services or employment, and so they're very susceptible to violence in Mexico.
And the other thing is detention.
Mm-hmm.
Also violations of human rights in terms of detentions?
Oh, correct. And they have done it with both children and adults by limiting either overcrowding some detentions. We saw examples of immigrants being held under a bridge just by a chain link fence. We've seen cases where they have not given children toothpaste and actually other hygiene products that are just basic human rights, and they are, again, trying to make it as difficult as possible, as painful as possible. So not only do these people do not get in, but they send a message back home that they're no longer welcome.
And the previous step of detention, the arrests, are also violations in terms of human rights?
It depends how they do them. I think that they're, ICE and Border Patrol has really been given orders to do their job to the fullest extent of their authority. And we're seeing some violations in the way that they're approaching communities. I think a lot of local municipalities are stepping up, but the reality is that the federal government has a lot of resources, and we're seeing a record number of arrests.
The governor of California is saying that he is stopping the construction of private detention centers because this is a moneymaker, and in reality it has nothing to do with the conditions that it should be done.
Outside of the immigration sort of world, there has been a movement of privatization, right, in the prison system throughout both criminal and civil. But particularly with immigration, we have seen an increase of very few companies. GEO is an example of them. Here in the Washington metropolitan area, there was a private company that is set to open a shelter for 200 kids. They got a $20 million contract. And so there's money to be made. And there are private companies that are making, putting themselves out there to get this contract, although there are a lot of organizations, religious organizations that have been, organizing shelters for years, but yet they go to the private companies because their interest is making money and not the care of the immigrant.
The other issue that we were mentioning that there is a concern of the civil rights organization is family separation. Mm-hmm. Still going on?
Yes, it continues to be to go on. We have to realize that when people are caught at the border is an expansive area. It really happens behind closed doors. We have to rely on Border Patrol reports and ICE reports to tell us what's going on. But at the end of the day, the moment that an immigrant gets captured, that really happens behind closed doors. And what we know of, that people continue to get separated, children are still being separated, and after this administration, whether it ends in a year or it ends in 4 more years, there's going to be an incredible amount of cleanup that is going to have to be done because so many people's rights have been violated, so many families have been separated, and it's going to take us years to get out of this.
Immigration, an issue that is going to be very much present in the coming presidential election. And we have seen the Democrats promising that they are going to be extremely concerned and open to try to accommodate the situation of the immigrants, even though Barack Obama, as a candidate in 2008, has promised in his first year full immigration reform with a path to citizenship. He was having the majority in both chambers of the Congress. He didn't do it, so he really betrayed the Hispanic community. Now Trump is signaling that is the worst possible elements for the country. How the position of the immigrants are going to be played by both sides in this election?
Well, immigration as an issue has always been used in politics, whether it's the left or the right, Republicans or Democrats, either promising to increase immigration or promising to stop it. What we're seeing with this administration, for the very first time, he's converting immigrants into a threat to the U.S., which we have not seen before. And so he's moving the argument more to the right, more an extreme version of just limiting people, because he wants to really change the immigration system into more of a merit system and forgo our family immigration system that we currently have. So unfortunately, both sides are going to say a lot of things, but at the end of the day we're going to have to do 2 things. One is clean up the messes that unfortunately this president is leaving behind, but really work hard to hold both parties accountable for what they're doing to immigrants.
What Carecen is doing precisely in all that scenario?
Well, besides providing our direct services, we have a legal clinic on immigration, but we're also promoting the education and for people to understand that they should not be afraid and they should engage with the electoral system. This country allows you to participate independent of your status. Now, you can do certain things when you're a citizen versus a resident versus undocumented, but people need to understand that they can participate so that we can take our destiny into our own hands.
And you think that there are going to be more registered to vote this time?
Oh yes, interesting enough, Cuccinelli, which is an advisor to President Trump, was saying how one of the proofs that Trump is not anti-immigrant is the record number of naturalizations that have happened in this year. What he doesn't realize is that the numbers are high because people are afraid, which can increase and will increase this upcoming year.
Abel Nuñez, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.